So, if you didn't already know what the Free Tibet movement is all about, here's the Dalai Lama with Rabbi Shmuley. You know, the unhinged Zionist who seems to be connected to every powerful person in America? Free Tibet is a CIA-backed separatist movement aimed at destabilizing China because they're building socialism and challenging US power. In Western culture, the Dalai Lama has been portrayed as this chill hippie guy who's all about peace and love. But prior to the Communist Revolution in China, the Dalai Lamas oversaw a brutal system of forced labor in Tibet. All of the wealth was controlled by a tiny religious elite who lived in a palace above the rest of the population, 90% of whom were peasants who spent their days doing forced labor under threat of violent punishment. Anybody who refused to work for the Dalai Lama or even questioned his benevolence was brutally punished to the point of permanent disfigurement. The Buddhist religion was used to enforce this system by telling the peasants that they needed to learn to detach from material things, while the religious elite was living a life of opulence surrounded by servants. And this is why the Free Tibet movement is more popular in America than it ever has been in China. The people of Tibet don't want to go back to being ruled by a US-backed theocratic dictator. In their eyes, Tibet was already freed by Mao Zedong in 1950. Would you want to be ruled by an overly religious landlord with the right to torture you? Freedom for Tibet, down with colonialism, a fossil in the 21st century. This is something that you'll hear a lot from Western liberals, but what they always leave out is that this was Tibet before communism. The Dalai Lama was actually a tyrannical landlord who ruled over many serfs that were treated like slaves. These people were forced to pay impossible taxes to the ruling elite that left them in incredible poverty. And if they couldn't pay those taxes, they had to take out loans, which left them drowning in debt. Anybody who disobeyed their feudal overlords was punished, often being maimed or tortured. There are reports of the Dalai Lama himself going after people's eyeballs. And Westerners don't really know this history. They think of Buddhism as this mystical, peaceful religion that can't be manipulated or utilized by the ruling class the same way that other religions can. But any religion can be manipulated in order to justify the current economic structure. And Buddhism was no different when it came to Tibetan feudalism. The serfs were told that they could reach enlightenment by detaching themselves from all material things, learning to be happy by working non-stop and living with nothing. Meanwhile, the Dalai Lama was living in luxury in a mansion filled with servants, looking over all of the land which was being worked for him by what were basically slaves. And when the Communist Revolution happened in China, they liberated the peasants from these horrific conditions. And now, because of their economic development projects, the people in Tibet have a standard of life that would have been literally unimaginable to the peasants living just 75 years ago. And the Dalai Lama has been scooped up by the CIA and used as an asset to destabilize China by arguing for Tibetan separatism. So, ironically, this is colonialism. What Mao Zedong did in Tibet was communism, and it liberated millions of people. You don't have to free Tibet, pal. Mao already did.
There's literally declassified CIA documents that talk about the CIA's secret war in Tibet. This one in particular talked about how the CIA took a bunch of Tibetans to Colorado to train them for insurgency. Google is free. All the information is right there. All you have to do is look up CIA Tibet and you'll find all this information. Not only are there books on what happened in Tibet, but also the US government have personally acknowledged it themselves. I know this contradicts your belief that the Americans are the good guys, but do some research and instead of telling me to put the tinfoil hat away, you should remove your rose-tinted glasses.
I think I finally understand why Western narratives often frame Xizang or Tibet as a place of lost freedom or oppression. The reality here is far more complex, but history is undeniably harsh. Xizang is the place closest to the sun, yet there were times sunlight barely reached its people. Some of the scenes I'm about to show may be uncomfortable, so please be advised. I've come to Xizang 7 times. Lhasa always felt modern, even comparable to Beijing or Shanghai. But today I went somewhere different, somewhere that shows a side of history rarely captured in travel photos. the memorial hall for emancipation of 1 million serfs in Xizang. Pause for a second and think about the name. 1 million serfs. The entire population here at that time was barely over 1 million. So you can imagine the history here is brutal. Before the 1950s, old Xizang was dominated by a feudal system where religion and politics were tightly intertwined. Over 95% of the population were serfs or slaves. Look at this pyramid of classes. At the very top, priceless, the three great lords, nobles, government officials, and senior monks. They owned and controlled almost everything. And second layer with 30 tails, the chaba, they are serfs tied to land, collecting taxes for their masters, but also forced into labor. And third layer, valued at 20 tails, the duiqiong, they're lower serfs. Often laborers were craftsmen, always dependent on their masters. And the bottom layer, worth only a blade of grass, the langsheng, the majority, they were born into slavery as property, passed down like livestock. Look at the taxes. Road tax, corpse carrying tax, butter tax, hair tax, singing tax. Sound almost like jokes. Crushing. No peasant in old Xizang ever paid off all debts in their lifetime. And it gets darker. Ritual items made from human remains, drums made from human skins, and trumpets made from leg bones. And this, an original document ordering supplies for a ceremony celebrating the Dalai Lama's birthday. One set of intestines, 2 skulls, various blood, a full sheet of human skin. Immediate delivery required. I honestly have no words. And here, a child being nailed into a wooden box, buried alive under the foundation of a building. The mother rushing to stop it. It's heartbreaking. Just one floor up on the observation deck, everything changes. There's the Potala Palace, majestic as ever, and around it, modern streets, schools, hospitals, and bustling neighborhoods. In only 6-7 decades, life here has changed beyond recognition. And since the founding of the Xizang Autonomous Region, every citizen over 18 gained the right to vote and stand for election. I write down there, by 1965, more than 2,200 representatives in local government were former serfs themselves. Golden statues and sacred scriptures couldn't free those buried under centuries of oppression, but modern governance and real development did. I remember my first visit back in 2017 when I explored small towns and villages around Lhasa. Every household displayed the national flags, and portraits of national leaders hung on the walls. In such remote places, the civic pride was astonishingly high, even more visible than in some major cities. At the time, I didn't fully understand it, but now I do. Because those who have endured the longest, darkest winters know better than anyone the true value of sunlight.
Do people in Tibet nowadays have human rights? Some people in the West keep shouting how much they worry about people there and hope they can go back to the good old days. So let's talk about it in this video. First, allow me to point out that in Chinese, the name of the region is called Xizang, not Tibet. Tibet is an English name, but the name Xizang has existed in Chinese history since the 13th century during the Yuan dynasty, and it was used in official documents in the 18th century during the Qing dynasty. Let's get back to the human rights situation in the old days. Before 1959, 95% of people in Xizang were serfs or slaves, living under a feudal theocratic system controlled by 3 ruling classes: monasteries, aristocratic families, and local governments. And these 3 ruling classes, which only consist of 5% of the population, possessed 99.7% of the arable land and almost all pastures, forests, and livestock in Xizang. But 95% of the population had nothing. They were born with debt they could never repay, and they worked as serfs for life. They were treated worse than livestock. Any small mistakes could cause them to face punishments like eye gouging or limb severing. Oh, do you know the 14th Dalai Lama, the Western country's favorite? His family was one of the aristocratic families in Xizang that owned incredible wealth, 27 manors, 30 pastures, and over 6,000 serfs. and he and his family received support from CIA for over 2 decades to stoke separatism within China. In the Western world, they present themselves as peaceful, devout Buddhists who harm no one. But do you know that when Xizang was under feudal theocratic rule, humans were turned into religious ritual objects? Horns made with serfs' thigh bones, bows with serfs' scalps, and drums made with young girls' skin. All I mentioned have historical records that can be found in China as well as in several Western scholars' books. Such a feudal system in Xizang, of course, wasn't allowed to continue to exist when the rest of China had already overthrown feudalism, warlords, and defeated foreign invaders, liberated the working class and farmers, and founded the People's Republic of China, a socialist country led by the working class and based on the alliance of workers and farmers. After a peaceful liberation in 1951, Xizang went through a democratic reform and abolished the serfdom system in 1959. So how are things going in Xizang since then? Let's look at some facts. First, in the early 50s, life expectancy in Xizang was 35.5 years. Now, it's 72. Second, extreme poverty was eliminated by 2020, and Xizang's GDP rose from $54 million in 1951 to $39 billion in 2024. Net income of farmers and herdsmen increased 100-fold. In old Xizang, the illiteracy rate was as high as 95%, but now there are schools all across Xizang, and all children in Xizang receive 15 years of free compulsory education, including food, accommodation, and expenses for learning materials. Paved roads, airports, the world's highest altitude railway, fast internet, electricity, and hospitals are all over Xizang. Monastery buildings, cultural relics are preserved and renovated with government spending and inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage List. Tibetan language is being used in publications, magazines, radios, and TV, and it's also printed on China's currency. There is still a lot to improve for Xizang. It is not an easy job. Lots of challenges brought by the unique geographic conditions of the plateau. Hence, the support to Xizang from other provinces and the central government has never stopped. So you tell me, when some people in the Western world cry about the human rights in Xizang, do they care about whether people in Xizang now actually have rights to live, to get education, healthcare, and development? Or do they just want to keep those people suffering like in the old days, so they can use that region to create instabilities to destabilize China? You can't believe what happened in Tibet in the past 70 years. As a reporter who frequently traveled to this region, I'm gonna tell you 3 shocking figures about Tibet. Number 1, stunning growth of life expectancy. Before 1951, the average life expectancy in Tibet was only 35 years old. I'd be dead already if I lived in old Tibet, because I'm already 35. But now, the average life expectancy in Tibet is 75 years old. Number 2, dramatic economic growth. The regional GDP grew by more than 300 times. This region, which suffered from insane poverty, had been lifted out of poverty by 2020. Number 3, no more illiteracy. Before 1951, more than 90% of people in Tibet were illiterate. But now, the illiteracy dropped to 0. All kids in Tibet can enjoy 15 years of free education. They don't need to pay for tuition fees, they don't need to pay for textbooks or meals at school. All the spendings will be covered by government fundings. On those awesome changes,
this Chinese man helped the United States spread anti-Chinese propaganda with the Uyghur genocide hoax, and now he's rotting in an ICE detention center. So here's what happened. This activist, who's obviously a US operative, went viral in 2021 for posting this video where he's seen crouching down and filming what looks like a regular prison. But he filmed the video claiming that it was a concentration camp where the Uyghur genocide was happening. And then October 7, 2023 happened, and the world saw what a real genocide looks like. People basically understood that this whole Uyghur genocide happening in China was a CIA operation. No sane person believes this nonsense. Also, if you zoom in on his video, you will literally see a basketball court in this so-called concentration camp. So I guess as they're suffering through their genocide, they're also taking breaks to shoot some hoops. Anyways, after exposing the Chinese for his American masters, he now finds himself in a real concentration camp in the free and democratic United States, and now faces the risk of being deported back to China. And remember, in the words of Henry Kissinger, the United States does not have allies, it only has interests.
I'm going to answer this question because I think there are people who would genuinely like to know. However, this commenter is not one of them. The majority of people who ask me what about China do not care about Tibetans or Uyghurs, and most of them don't even know what or where Taiwan is. The people who ask me what about Japan do not care about Chinese or Koreans. This is deflection and projection because their feelings are hurt hearing me talk about their history, so they're going to throw every Asian atrocity up against the wall to see what sticks to me because in their minds, two wrongs makes them right. My ancestors defended Tibet when it was under Qing dynasty rule from British invasion. In 1904, my great-great-granduncle was the negotiator for the Qing dynasty who did not allow the British to split Tibet. In hindsight, it may have been better if Tibet had fallen to British occupation because then it would have been like Hong Kong. But what were the British doing in Tibet? They were colonizing India and they were taking advantage of a failing Qing dynasty to push into and colonize China. My great-great-granduncle had been educated and raised in the United States from the time he was 8 until he finished college because there were influential people in China who wanted China to become a modern democracy, and they felt that the United States government, education system, infrastructure, and engineering were superior to what the rest of the world had to offer, and they wanted China to modernize in the United States image. But what did the United States do? They passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. So then, who do you think China turned to when it was time to install a government and modernize? My great-great-granduncle in 1911 was instrumental in the revolt that led to the Qing dynasty being overthrown, which allowed Tibet to become independent from 1912 until 1950. And actually, the rest of my family's history in China parallels Tibet's struggle to maintain its independence. My great-grandfather was also raised and educated in the United States, but because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, he couldn't start a family here, so in the 1920s, he went back to China. My mom was raised in Hong Kong and came to the United States when she was 16. My dad was raised in Taiwan, and I was born and raised in the United States. I have not had any family in China in over 80 years. We were neither KMT nor CCP. So for people who know Chinese history, that tells you everything you need to know about how I feel about Tibet and Taiwan and Uyghurs. But an important thing to understand is that I am American. Beyond my family history, my opinion on these matters is American and has been influenced by American media. So it is no more well-informed than that of any other Americans.
It takes wisdom for one to say, I don't know. From what this lady has shared, you can basically see that there are Chinese Americans that you would meet and you would also believe in propaganda. And sometimes they spread it without knowing it is propaganda, because once you hear a lie many times, it becomes your truth. So, yeah, where are you getting your information from? I hope you've learned something.
Every time I share something positive about China, I will always get one comment. What about Tibet? Tibet suppressed. Just free Tibet. Guys, Tibet was already freed in 1959. How free? How dare of those people to judge, especially they have never ever been to there before. Don't know anything about it, haven't done any research before. Immediate default action is negative, very dismissive, just really strikes me. Well, then how about this? Free California. We urge the US government to protect the legitimate rights of California. Just free California, California independence. But you know what? You are asking the right person. I just visited Tibet last month. Before going, I read a lot of books, and even on the way, I was studying. What I saw was not outside people imagine. Tibet or Xizang is far more developed than I expected. Cities like Lhasa and Shiraz are modern, lively, and feel no difference from big cities in southern China. Now, here's part many don't know, and it's so heartbreaking. And I won't show any pictures because it's too bloody and brutal. But you can search for yourself. Well, before the 1950s, Old Tibet, which is also called Xizang, was under a feudal system where religion and politics were tightly tied together. More than 95% of people were serfs, basically slaves. They worked very hard, paid endless taxes, and were forced into labor. Most were born into slavery, passed down like property. No peasant could ever pay them off in a lifetime. And it was even darker. Ritual objects were sometimes made from human remains, drums from human skin, trumpets from leg bones. While in the Tibet Museum, I saw a statue showing a child being burned alive under a building's infrastructure, like as part of the ritual. A mother rushing to stop it. I admire myself. That really strikes me and broke my heart. I cried instantly. In just 6 or 7 decades, life here has completely transformed. Since the establishment of Xizang Autonomous Region, every citizen over 18 has had the right to vote and stand for the election, and Tibet's GDP growth has ranked #1 last year. When I was in Shikaz, I visited Tashlunbu Monastery. It is one of the most secret Buddhist sites, just like the Potala Palace. The place is open to the public, full of tourists, and I even saw many Western visitors there. We all watched the traditional Buddhist debate together. The monks argued so fiercely, but it's part of their tradition, a way to practice and shape their understanding of Buddhism. Honestly, it was pretty impressive. So that's why I really hope the people who keep saying China is suppressing Tibet could actually come here and see it with their own eyes. Anyway, I'm Kelly Tang, one video, one insight about China. Talk to you later.
So let me get this straight. A woman just gave birth and her newborn is so fragile that they're in the NICU, and ICE decided now's the time to take the mother away. That baby is lying in a hospital incubator without the mom. Not because she was a danger and not because there was some kind of emergency, but because of an immigration system that treats people like paperwork. We've heard politicians say that we don't separate families. Clearly that's a lie. If you're willing to remove a mother from their sickly newborn hours after giving birth, while the newborn lies in intensive care, then you are by very definition separating families. Doctors will tell you skin-to-skin contact matters. Bonding matters. A mother's presence in a NICU can literally affect the outcome. ICE knew that, and they did it anyway. This isn't about borders or safety. It's about a system that's detached from humanity. So detached that it sees a hospital bracelet and says, still take her. If this doesn't bother you, if this doesn't cross a line for you, then there is no line. Because no policy, no politics, and no administration should ever justify tearing a mother away from a newborn fighting for its life. Share your thoughts in the comment section and follow me for more.
This is a traditional Uyghur dance. She gets in